Chapter 521, Set Sail. This chapter is updated by novels.pl. Xilong Yi was still in disbelief. He thought he had heard wrong, so he asked, "Really?" Zhang Yuochen's patience was tested. He said in a serious manner, "You better get going before I change my mind." Xilong Yi felt the chill coming from Zhang Yuochen. He did not want to stay there any longer. He unfolded his body and leapt forward, landing on the roof of a pavilion beside the street. Swoosh! After a few leaps, he disappeared completely. Amitabha Monkey walked forward with his giant blade in the scabbard. He stood not far from Zhang Yuochen, an honest smile on his face. Upon seeing Monkey, Zhang Yuochen frowned as if he had seen the plague god coming. He quickly moved his body and rushed toward the primitive world ferry. Monkey exhibited a profound bodily movement of Buddhism and chased Zhang Yuochen with neither delay nor urgency. Like a piece of candy, he was glued to Zhang Yuochen. The 10,000 Fields Tavern was an elegant villa. Saint Xu Gentry disciple, Xu Hai, the Black Market Excellence Hall's green-robed emissary, third disciple of the ghost saint, Yin Yugeng, and 10 evil warriors were all gathered there. They were standing by a pond. Xu Hai and the evil warriors all looked strangely at Xilong Yi, who had just returned. Xu Hai looked at him coldly and asked, "So Zhang Yuochen told you that he is going to the Xuanwu primitive world today?" Xilong Yi felt something wrong in the atmosphere, but he bit the bullet and answered, "That's right." He also said that if you want to kill him or rescue Orange Star Emissary, this is your golden opportunity. Xu Hai took 3 steps forward, stopping in front of Xilong Yi. "Did you tell him about the alliance between Saint Xu Gentry and the black market?" Xu Hai's body exuded a strong force of oppression. Even the air seemed to have solidified and stopped flowing. Xilong Yi felt like a huge mountain was pressing on him. He quickly answered, "No, I didn't." "How could I tell him something so confidential?" "Really?" Xu Hai sneered and said, "Do you think I'm a fool? If you did not tell him, would he have let you go? I believe you are now his person." Xilong Yi was frightened and his face turned pale. His legs crumbled and fell to the ground. With a trembling voice he said, "My lord, please, believe me, my lord, I dare not commit treachery toward our gentry." Xu Hai's palm struck the top of Xilong Yi's head, letting off a loud snap. 4 streams of blood flowed from the top of his head to his neck. Fresh, red blood gurgled out, dyeing Xilong Yi's robe crimson. Xu Hai retrieved his palm and then took out a white cloth from his sleeve, wiping the fresh blood from his hand. He smiled and said, "I'm incapable of disciplining my subordinates, please forgive me, my dear brothers." Green-robed emissary giggled. "We can see that Xilong Yi has been persuaded by Zhang Yuochen. Zhang Yuochen must have already set up a trap and sent Xilong Yi here to lure us to go to Xuanwu primitive world so that he can destroy us once and for all." Xu Hai snorted coldly. How childish of Zhang Yuochen to think that we'll fall into his trap with this kind of cheap plot. He thought we're that stupid, didn't he? However, this might be our chance. Since Zhang Yuochen is going to the Xuanwu primitive world, why don't we try to turn the tables? Green-robed emissary thought for a moment and then said, "Be patient. Zhang Yuochen is not someone we can take lightly. We must never let our guard down." An evil warrior who was wearing a long black robe with a mask came in quickly and said, "Report to His Excellency. A disciple of the Blood Cloud sect told us that Zhang Yuochen had already arrived at the port of the primitive world. He has reported with the Ministry of War and is set to go to the battlefield of primitive world in the Xuanwu primitive world." Green-robed emissary was curious and asked, "How many people are going with him?" "Only himself." Green-robed emissary was slightly astonished and said, "Are you sure it is only him?" The evil warrior answered, "I've looked into this matter and it is confirmed that Zhang Yuochen is going alone. Plus, he has already boarded the ship to Xuanwu primitive world. I have also checked on whoever has connections with Zhang Yuochen, such as the Saint Academy, the Juns, and the Silver Sky Mercenary Corps. None of them actually boarded with him. Therefore, it is confirmed that Zhang Yuochen is going to the Xuanwu primitive world alone." Xu Hai could not help but look at Xilong Yi's dead body. He wondered whether he might have killed the wrong person. However, even if he had killed someone wrongly, Xu Hai did not have any sense of guilt. Xu Hai felt that Zhang Yuochen was too cunning. He deliberately sent Xilong Yi back to act as his messenger, causing him to be misunderstood. leading to his death. Therefore, he believed that Zhang Yuochen should account for Xilong Yi's death. Xihai's eyes were cold as he said, Zhang Rukan is too conceited. He really dares to go alone to the Xuanwu primitive world. Green-robed emissary laughed loudly and said, Zhang Yuochen was a warrior from nowhere, yet all of a sudden he reached the pinnacle of the younger generation and successfully became first on the heaven board. Having made his name, it was inevitable that he would become arrogant and complacent. Xihai also laughed and said, I always thought that Zhang Yuochen was a flawless guy, but now I can see that arrogance is his biggest enemy. Did he really think that he could against Saint Xu Gentry and the black market all alone? Since he is so arrogant, we shall teach him a lesson. Let him know that modesty is the most important virtue. Green-robed emissary laughed huskily. Xihai led the 3 monks of the fish dragon realm, green-robed emissary, and the 3rd disciple of the ghost saint, Yin Yugang, who also brought along the evil warriors of the black market, to the port of the primitive world. Xuanwu primitive world was a top-ranking medium-level primitive world. It was vast and full of danger. It was home to countless powerful indigents of the primitive world. The war between the Kunlun's field and the Xuanwu primitive world had been at a stalemate for 120 years. Yet the Xuanwu primitive world was still not completely subjugated. It was said that there was a saint-level indigenous king in the Xuanwu primitive world who was so exceptionally powerful that he had killed some half-cents of Kunlun's field. At that moment, the ship to the primitive world was still idle. Zhang Yuochen stood on deck. His hand was holding a book that outlined the map of hell in the Xuanwu primitive world and some explanation about the indigenous creatures in the Xuanwu primitive world. Zhang Yuochen had spent 3 spiritual crystals to buy the book from a soldier of the primitive world at the port. Monk Li Dai was not far from Zhang Yuochen. He sat on the floor quietly with his knife at his back, just like a stone, or maybe a dead tree. It's no surprise that it is known as a medium-level primitive world since there are saint-class indigents in it. It looks like I need to be extra cautious when I'm at the Xuanwu primitive world. Otherwise, if I get noticed by the indigents of the half-saint class, I might become dead meat. Zhang Yuochen closed the scroll and put it away. He had memorized its contents. Zhang Yuochen felt eyes staring at his back. So he turned around and saw the soldiers of primitive world. He looked away and spoke to himself. So many people have followed. It seems that I've become a fragrant bun. Everyone wants a bite. There were more than 6,000 soldiers of primitive world on board. The weakest among them were at the initial stage of the heaven realm, while 30% of them had achieved the fish dragon realm. That meant that there were almost 200 monks of the fish dragon realm in that one ship. Zhang Yuochen could sense that there were at least 50 soldiers of the fish dragon realm from the primitive world focusing on him. No doubt, these people were here just for him. These were just the soldiers of primitive world of the fish dragon realm. He estimated that there were more soldiers of primitive world in the heaven realm who had come with the same motive. Some were probably here just for the dragon pearl and holy sword, while some came for the inheritance of Xuanwu. It seems this journey to the Xuanwu primitive world is a perilous one. Zhang Yuochen shook his head with a smile. He knew that this journey was going to be a bumpy one, yet he was not afraid. He had to go to the Xuanwu primitive world, whether it was because he wanted to break through to the ultimate realm or to endeavor to look for the Xuanwu heritage. Of course, Zhang Yuochen was not reckless or arrogant person. He had the confidence to escape since he dared go there. At that moment, 2 more groups of people boarded the ship. Zhang Yuochen recognized the leaders of these 2 groups. They were Xihai of Saint Xu Gentry and green-robed emissary of the Black Market Excellence Hall. They actually came. Zhang Yuochen said. Xihai boarded the ship with the 3 monks of the fish dragon realm and walked in Zhang Yuochen's direction. They stopped not far to his left but did not take any action. Xihai acted as if he didn't know Zhang Yuochen. He whispered with the 3 monks of the fish dragon realm but kept looking at Zhang Yuochen from time to time. Unlike Xihai, the arrival of green-robed emissary caused a commotion on the ship. Everyone knew about the hostility between Zhang Yuochen and the Black Market Excellence Hall. The appearance of green-robed emissary was not an ordinary signal. With his appearance, the other monks who had designs on Zhang Yuochen would have to forget their plans. After all, The black market was so powerful that commoners would not want to challenge them. Green Robe Emissary brought only two people, a man and a woman. The man was the third disciple of the ghost saint, Yin Yukeng. Yin Yukeng looked gentle, but his skin was dreadfully pale, as if he had not been exposed to sunlight all year long, giving off a feeling of eeriness. The woman was called Iron Lady. She was the 10th killer who was trained by the Blood Cloud sect. She was tall and wore a tight-fitting black leather armor that emphasized her huge chest, hips and her long, slender legs. She was wearing a pair of metal iron boots that made a thumping sound with every step she took. Iron Lady wore a black iron mask that covered her eyes and nose. The cloak she was wearing made her look very capable and full of heroic spirit. With a single glance, one could tell that she had killed numerous top masters. Yin Yukeng went straight to Zhang Yuochen. Without bothering to hide his hostility, he said, "Zhang Yuochen, where did you hide my junior sister apprentice?" Orange Star Emissary was the fourth disciple of the ghost saint, so obviously she would be Yin Yukeng's junior sister apprentice. When Yin Yukeng learned that Zhang Yuochen had set sail for the Xuanwu primitive world alone, he immediately checked Zhang Yuochen's residence, but Orange Star Emissary was nowhere to be found. Yin Yukeng had no choice but to follow Green Robed Emissary to the port of the primitive world. He wanted to interrogate Zhang Yuochen directly. Zhang Yuochen responded calmly, "Who are you? And who is your junior sister apprentice?" "I'm the disciple of the ghost saint, Yin Yukeng." "You must now know who my junior sister apprentice is, right?" Yin Yukeng replied. Zhang Yuochen replied, "So you're here for Orange Star Emissary." "Too bad. She has already pledged allegiance to me. I'm afraid she will not be returning to the black market in the future." "What did you just say?" Yin Yukeng's eyes turned red as the anger in his body made his hands burn. When he arrived at Myriad Chaos Mountain, Yin Yukeng heard that Zhang Yuochen had abused his junior sister apprentice. He even made her his sex slave. He had doubts about those rumors at first, but after hearing what Zhang Yuochen said, he finally believed it. If Zhang Yuochen had not used despicable methods, torturing her, would the junior sister apprentice have surrendered to him? Zhang Yuochen had not expected Yin Yukeng to be so angry. Deep inside, he was rather surprised. He could not fathom the reason behind Yin Yukeng's ire. He said, "The port of the primitive world is still within the Myriad Chaos Mountain. Therefore, I advise you not to start anything here." Green-robed emissary was worried that Yin Yukeng would not be able to control his anger and lose his senses, so he rushed forward and stopped him. He said, "Brother, be patient. We'll take care of him once we reach the Xuanwu primitive world." Yin Yukeng controlled his anger and backed off. After a short while, under the escort of a commander of the 9th change in the Fish Dragon realm from the Ministry of War, the array of the primitive world's ship gradually formed into an egg-shaped light screen with the ship wrapped in its middle. The ship of the primitive world set sail for the Xuanwu primitive world. Note on military merits. The military merits obtained from the challenge at the Heavenly Ring will not be added to, but rather will only replace, the military merits of the warrior that was high ranked on the Heaven Board. Therefore, when Zhang Yuochen reached the top of the Heaven Board, his merits merely replaced the military merits of Huang Shenyi. They were not added together.